Chapter 1. The Birthday Dress That Never Came. Riley Emerson had always been different. While other girls in her elementary class twirled in pastel dresses and compared the glitter on their shoes, Riley was climbing trees, racing boys in the playground, and showing off her collection of superhero stickers. She wasn't trying to rebel. She simply felt more herself in jeans and a hoodie than in any frilly skirt her father ever bought. It was her 10th birthday, a day most children awaited with excitement, but to Riley, birthdays had become a quiet battlefield. The sun was shining outside their modest home in Seattle, where Riley lived with her father, Edward Emerson. Her mother had passed away when she was just 4. Since then, it had been just the two of them, each retreating into their own version of silence. Edward was a man of routine. A former Marine turned watchmaker, he lived by precision, in time, in words, in expectations. On every one of Riley's birthdays, he would take off work early, come home with a small cake, and place a carefully wrapped box on her bed. And every year, Riley left the box unopened. That year, the routine hadn't changed. Riley had spent her afternoon at the park, kicking a soccer ball around with her friend Max. She came home sweaty, her sneakers muddy, her hair tucked messily into a cap. When she walked into the house, the scent of vanilla cake greeted her from the kitchen, where a simple round cake with the words "Happy 10th Birthday Riley" sat under a glass dome. On her bed lay the gift, rectangular, flat. Wrapped in silver paper with a ribbon so neatly tied, it looked more like it belonged in a magazine than in a child's room. She sighed. Without touching it, she went to the bathroom to wash up. When she came out, her father was sitting at the dining table, still in his dark blue apron from the watch shop, sipping black coffee. His eyes flickered up at her, quick, assessing. "Did you open your present?" he asked. "No," Riley said bluntly. Edward's jaw tightened. He said nothing more, only reached for the newspaper and began flipping the pages, pretending not to be bothered. But Riley noticed the way his hands shook slightly. She noticed the way he didn't touch the cake until much later, when she had already gone to her room and closed the door. That night, Riley lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The wrapped box still sat untouched on her desk. She wondered what dress it was this time. Pink? Yellow? Something with lace? She imagined her father in the store, awkward and unsure, picking something he thought a daughter should love. Did he not see her? Did he still think she would wake up one day and want to be someone else? She sat up and looked at the gift again. For a moment, she considered opening it, maybe just to see. But something stubborn in her refused. If she opened it, it felt like admitting that he was right, that her way of being wasn't enough. So instead, Riley pulled her hoodie tighter and went to sleep, with the birthday dress still wrapped, waiting for a moment that never came. In the next room, Edward sat alone in his workshop, the ticking of dozens of clocks echoing around him. On the desk next to him sat an empty box, its twin now resting on Riley's table. He reached for an old photo of his wife, smiling in a summer dress, and whispered to the silence, "I just want her to feel beautiful." But silence didn't answer. Only the steady tick-tock of time and the distance between a father and daughter who didn't know how to bridge the space love had silently carved. Chapter 2. The Memory in the Mirror. The morning after her 10th birthday, Riley stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, studying her reflection. Her chin-length hair was a little too uneven. She'd cut it herself last week with kitchen scissors after a girl in class told her she looked like a boy with messy curls. Her oversized hoodie swallowed her frame, and she liked it that way. She never felt comfortable in tight or flashy clothes. It wasn't about rebellion, it was about comfort, safety. From the hallway, she heard her father's footsteps. Precise. Punctual. He paused at her bedroom door like he did every morning, but he didn't speak. A brief silence passed before the front door clicked shut behind him. He was off to the watch shop. Riley sighed. She went into her room and sat at the edge of the bed. The silver box from last night still sat there, perfectly wrapped, untouched. She picked it up, weighing it in her hands. It wasn't heavy, but something about it felt dense. Like it was filled with more than just fabric. Like it held years of silence and misunderstanding. She placed the box down and opened her desk drawer. Inside was a sketch pad. Riley loved drawing, comics, characters, made-up worlds where no one cared what you wore or how you looked. She flipped to the page she'd started the night before, a superhero with short hair, baggy pants, and a confident smirk. She named her Rebel Star. It was the version of herself she wished she could be outside the pages. Halfway through coloring in Rebel Star's boots, Riley heard the jingle of a bell. Not from inside the house, from the shop. Her father's watch shop was connected to their home by a narrow hallway. Riley had rarely gone there since she was a little kid. It smelled like old wood and oil, and everything felt fragile, like it wasn't made for someone like her. But that morning, something pulled her in. She crept down the hallway and pushed open the workshop door. Her father wasn't there, but his workbench was lit by a small overhead lamp. Tiny screwdrivers, magnifying glasses, and gears were laid out in careful rows. Next to them, leaning against a stack of old books, was a photograph. It was her mother, young, radiant, standing in a field of sunflowers, laughing in a light blue sundress. She looked so free, so full of joy. Riley stared at the photo for a long moment. Then her eyes drifted to the sketch pad sitting beside it. Her father's sketch pad. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were dozens of penciled drawings, rough, imperfect, but full of feeling. They were all of dresses. Not just random dresses, but carefully designed ones. Some short and playful, others elegant and flowing. Next to each design was a small note in her father's careful handwriting. Birthday, age 6, something soft, like her mother used to wear. Age 8, maybe green this time, she likes the grass. Age 10, something bold, she's growing stronger. Riley's fingers trembled. She hadn't known. She thought those gifts were just store-bought symbols of control. But her father, he had made them, designed them, hoped for them. She put the sketch pad down and backed away, her throat tight. She had spent years resenting the dresses, resenting him, not knowing they were his language of love. Misguided, maybe, but sincere. The jingle of the bell rang again. Her father returned from the morning coffee run, unaware that his daughter had just uncovered the quiet secret he had been holding onto for a decade. Riley slipped back into her room, her thoughts racing. She looked at the silver box again, now glowing in a new kind of light. She didn't open it. But this time, she didn't ignore it either. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Things. That afternoon, Riley sat by her bedroom window, the silver box resting on her lap. She didn't open it. Not yet. But her fingers moved along the edges of the ribbon, absent-mindedly tracing the curve of the bow. Outside, the autumn wind swept through the maple trees that lined their quiet street in Seattle, sending crimson leaves spiraling like little dancers across the sidewalk. She could hear her father downstairs, the familiar clinking of tools echoing from his workshop. It was a comforting sound, one that had formed the background noise of her childhood. But for most of her life, she had interpreted that sound as distance, as him hiding behind watches and gears to avoid facing her. Now, she wasn't so sure. Riley opened her sketch pad again. She stared at Rebel Star, her fictional alter ego, and wondered, if Rebel Star was real, what would she say to Edward Emerson? Would she fight? Scream? Or try to understand? There was a knock on the door. Her heart skipped. Her father never knocked. He usually just waited outside, silent. This was different. Yeah, she called, her voice more uncertain than she expected. Edward peeked in, his eyes pausing on the silver box in her lap. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, or was it hope? He held something in his hand, a small, brown paper bag. "I brought you lunch," he said, setting it on her desk. "Grilled cheese. Your favorite." "Thanks," she murmured. He didn't leave. Instead, he stood awkwardly by the doorway, hands in his pockets, as if unsure what to do next. Riley watched him, noticing how tired he looked. There were more gray streaks in his hair than she remembered. His shoulders seemed heavier now, weighed down by the years of silence between them. "You were in the workshop today," he said quietly. She froze. How did you know?" "I forgot to relock the drawer." "You always notice the little things." "Like your mother." Riley looked away, cheeks flushing. She expected him to scold her for snooping, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "You saw the sketches." She nodded slowly. "Yeah." There was a pause. Then he added, "I didn't know how else to reach you. You never liked when I talked too much. I thought maybe if I could just make something beautiful for you, you'd understand." Riley swallowed hard. "I thought you were trying to change me. I thought those dresses were punishments." Edward took a step closer, then stopped. "I was scared," he admitted. "When your mother died, I didn't know how to raise a daughter, especially one who didn't fit what I expected. I didn't mean to push you away. I just didn't want you to be hurt by the world." Her voice cracked. "But you hurt me too." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know." The room fell quiet. Riley looked down at the box in her lap again. She reached up and slowly untied the ribbon, her heart pounding. The paper fell away in soft crinkles, revealing a beautiful deep blue dress. Simple but elegant, with little silver stars stitched along the collar, just like the superhero cape she'd drawn years ago. She ran her fingers over the fabric. "It's for this year," Edward said softly. "Your 10th birthday dress is still upstairs. So are the others. But this one is now." Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She didn't cry often, it made her feel exposed. But something broke inside her, something that had been holding on too tightly for too long. "Can I keep them?" she asked. He smiled gently. "They've always been yours." And in that moment, father and daughter sat in the quiet, not needing to say much more. Between them lay not just a dress, but a bridge finally built after 10 years of silence. Chapter 4. 10 years of fabric and silence. That evening, Riley stood before the attic door at the end of the hallway. It had always been there, untouched, forgotten, or perhaps purposely avoided. For years, she had passed it without a second glance, assuming it held only boxes of old memories. Maybe some of her mom's things, maybe dusty photo albums no one had the heart to open. But now she knew better. With hesitant fingers, she turned the brass knob and pushed the door open. The scent of cedarwood and thyme drifted into her nose. Old floorboards, aged cardboard, a whisper of her childhood. The light from the hallway spilled into the dim space, revealing boxes stacked neatly against the far wall. One in particular sat on top, marked in her father's clean, methodical handwriting. "Riley, birthdays." Her heart squeezed. She walked slowly across the creaky floor and opened the box. Inside, layer after layer of delicate tissue paper cushioned the contents. Riley peeled one back and gasped. The first dress was soft yellow with little white daisies embroidered along the hem. She remembered the summer she turned 6, when she refused to attend her cousin's garden party because she didn't want to wear something girly. Her dad had yelled that day. She had cried. But here, in her hands, was proof he hadn't just wanted to force a dress on her, he had picked it with care. She unfolded the second dress. A light green one, as he had written in the sketchbook. The third was blue with tiny buttons shaped like stars. Each dress was different, thoughtfully chosen or even handmade. Some still had tags, unworn, untouched. Others bore small handwritten notes tucked into the folds. "She likes capes." Maybe this collar will feel like one. Not too pink. Maybe purple is softer. I hope she smiles this year. Riley sank to her knees, tears streaming freely now. These weren't dresses meant to control her. They were silent apologies, yearly offerings, desperate hopes. Every stitch was love masked as expectation, misread through the lens of pain and defiance. Behind her, she heard footsteps creak on the stairs. Edward stood there, holding a mug of tea. I used to bring them up here at night, he said. After you'd gone to bed. I didn't want you to feel pressured. I just kept hoping that one day you'd want to see them. Want to know? Riley turned. Her voice barely a whisper. Why didn't you ever say anything? I didn't know how, he admitted, setting the mug down beside her. Every time I tried, it felt like I was only making things worse. And I thought, maybe giving space was better than saying the wrong thing. She nodded slowly. I needed space. But I also needed to know I was still loved. You were. Every day. Even when I didn't understand you, I never stopped loving you. The attic fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time, one that didn't feel like absence, but presence. Like breath held between two people who had finally started to speak the same language. Riley stood and held one of the dresses to her chest. I want to try this one on, she said softly. Edward blinked, stunned, then nodded. I'll wait downstairs. She descended some minutes later, the light green dress flowing just past her knees. It didn't feel like a costume anymore. It felt like a gift, not just from her father, but to herself. Beautiful, he said, voice cracking. Not just the dress, she replied. This moment. Thank you. Edward smiled, reaching for his old camera. Can I take a picture? For once, she said, I'd like that. And just like that, the years of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and quiet hurt began to unravel, not erased, but softened, like fabric warmed by long-forgotten sun. Chapter 5. The Boardroom and the Backlash. 2 months later. Riley stood in front of the tall glass doors of Vantage PR Group's main conference room in downtown Seattle, her reflection staring back at her. The company had just landed its biggest contract of the year, a luxury fashion house expansion into the Pacific Northwest, and today was the formal presentation to the CEO. She straightened her blazer, a custom-fit gray tailored piece over a black blouse, simple, sharp, and androgynous. She still didn't like dresses for work. Not because she was rebelling, but because she had finally learned which version of herself felt both authentic and empowered. But not everyone understood that. Behind her, coworkers whispered, "Why does she always dress like that? She looks like she's trying to be a guy. Maybe she thinks being edgy makes her smart." Riley had heard it all before. High heels and lip gloss were still considered currency in many corporate circles, and Riley, with her cropped hair and deliberate fashion neutrality, was often seen as an outlier. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting their voices drift into the background like white noise. Then she took a deep breath and walked into the room. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with formality. The CEO of the fashion house, Francine Leroux, was already seated, an elegant older woman in a silk cream suit, perfectly poised, her chin slightly raised. Riley had studied her for weeks, bold in business, traditional in aesthetic. "Good morning," Riley said, offering a firm handshake. "I'm Riley Emerson, your lead strategist." Francine raised an eyebrow at her. Her eyes scanned Riley from head to toe, not rudely, but perceptively. Then she nodded slowly. "Unconventional," she said. Riley's stomach twisted, but she kept her expression steady. "I believe good strategy is about standing out. We'll see." The presentation began. Riley moved through the pitch with confidence, her voice smooth, her data tight. The campaign was clean, daring, and focused on sustainability, a fresh angle for the brand. She used fewer buzzwords, more storytelling. She was herself, analytical but warm. sharp but deeply grounded. When she finished, silence lingered. Francine tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You're good," she finally said. "But your look, I'm curious. In a brand that sells dresses, you don't wear one." There it was. The moment Riley had prepared for but dreaded all the same. She paused, then smiled, not defensively, but sincerely. "I used to think femininity meant one thing, soft fabrics, long hair, polished heels," she said. "But I've learned that femininity is also resilience, clarity, and honesty. I've worn dresses, and I love what they represent. But when I show up like this, I'm not rejecting beauty. I'm just choosing the version that fits me best." Francine stared at her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "When I started this brand, they told me a black woman with no design degree would never sell couture. So I wore a pantsuit to my first investor meeting and told them, if you can't see fashion in this, you're not ready for my dresses." The room laughed gently, the tension melting. "I like your fire," Francine added. "You remind me of myself. Just make sure you let people see your heart behind the armor." Riley exhaled slowly, her shoulders loosening. As the meeting ended and the executives filed out, Riley stood alone by the window, overlooking the city that had both shaped and challenged her. The voices of judgment didn't disappear, but they no longer defined her. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Proud of you. Just saw the company press release. You wore the blazer. But the fire, that's all you." She smiled, her eyes stinging. Maybe the world wouldn't always understand. But maybe it didn't have to. Because she did. And that was enough. Chapter 6. Birthday Blues and Brave Beginnings. The week of Riley's 25th birthday arrived with a surprising chill. It was early spring in Seattle, but the rain returned just in time to dampen sidewalks and plans. Still, Riley didn't mind. Her mood was reflective, not melancholy, but deep, the kind of quiet that makes you look inward. Her coworkers had planned a casual happy hour for her, and while she appreciated the gesture, she declined. Something about this year felt different. She didn't want balloons or cake. She didn't even want to be surrounded by people she half-trusted in a room filled with forced laughter. She wanted clarity. And she wanted to go home. That morning, she stared at herself in the mirror longer than usual. Hanging on the back of her closet door was a dress, one of the birthday dresses her father had saved. She had tried it on in secret a few weeks ago after discovering the attic full of them, and this one had felt like it had been waiting for her. Soft navy silk with subtle embroidery along the neckline, silver stars. A quiet echo of her childhood superhero dreams. She took it down now, running her fingers along the fabric. Then, slowly, she changed. When she stepped out of her apartment in heels, low ones, but still heels, and her dark waves brushed lightly against her cheek, Seattle barely noticed. But she did. She hailed a cab to her childhood neighborhood, clutching a small gift bag in her lap the entire way. Inside the bag, a new watch. A limited edition automatic model she had designed in secret. Engraved on the back with 5 simple words. "You gave me your time." It was the only way she knew to say thank you in her father's language. She stepped out in front of Emerson timepieces, the storefront unchanged. The old bell above the door still jingled the same way it had for 20 years. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she stepped inside. Her father looked up from behind the counter, stunned. For a moment, he didn't speak. His eyes took in her dress. Her hair curled just slightly, the soft makeup that brightened her face. But what caught him most was the smile, gentle, sincere, a smile that said, "I chose this, not for the world, but for myself and for you." "Happy birthday," he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. "Thanks, Dad. I didn't think you'd come this year." "I wasn't sure either," she said honestly. He stepped out from behind the counter, more hesitant than usual. He opened a drawer and pulled out a flat box smaller than before, wrapped in navy blue with a silver ribbon. "I almost didn't buy one this year," he said. "Thought maybe it wasn't something you needed anymore." She took it, her fingers trembling. "I'll always need to know you cared," she whispered. When she opened it, it was a silver shawl, soft, warm, elegant. Not a dress this time. A compliment. Something to go with what she had chosen. An offering, not a correction. Tears filled her eyes. "I brought you something too," she said, handing him the small gift bag. He opened the box slowly, reading the engraving on the back of the watch with furrowed brows. Then he sat down, overwhelmed. For once, the watchmaker had no words. They spent the rest of the day in the back of the shop, eating takeout on paper plates and drinking cheap tea like it was fine wine. They talked more than they had in years about her work, his clocks, her mother, her sketches, his dreams for the shop. The light from the front window dimmed with the setting sun. But neither of them moved. As Riley leaned back in her chair, she thought, "This isn't just my birthday, it's our beginning." She had worn the dress. Not because she had to, but because she finally could. And because she finally wanted to. Chapter 7. Designing Something New. A week after her birthday, Riley sat at her drafting table in her apartment, surrounded by swatches of fabric, sketches, and open notebooks. The room, usually minimalist and clean, was now a beautiful mess, a creative storm she hadn't felt in years. On the table in front of her was a nearly finished concept, a blazer dress hybrid, structured shoulders, clean lines, paired with subtle embroidery of watch gears along the hem. A quiet tribute to her father's craft and her own aesthetic. Bold yet elegant. Feminine yet fierce. It wasn't for work. It wasn't for a brand. It was for her. The moment she'd returned home from that birthday with her father, something inside had shifted. For years, she had tried to separate the two versions of herself, the girl who wanted to be free of labels and the woman who longed to be seen, even if it meant risking vulnerability. For once, those two didn't feel at odds. They felt like partners in the same design. Her phone buzzed. A message from her father. "Dropped off a few old tools at your building front desk. Thought you might like them." Riley smiled. She padded downstairs in slippers, her hair in a messy bun and a pencil still behind her ear. The doorman handed her a small wooden box. Inside were vintage watch parts, gears, hands, a few unused faces. And a note. "You always liked building things your own way. Thought you could give these a second life." She ran her fingers over the brass pieces, heart swelling. A second life. That was exactly what this was. Later that night, Riley FaceTimed her father. He picked up from the workshop. Still in his apron, the faint tick-tick of clocks echoing in the background. "Hey," she said. "So I have this idea." "Oh," he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I want to create a capsule collection. Limited pieces, inspired by women who don't fit the mold, who straddle softness and strength. And I want to incorporate actual watch parts into some of the designs." He blinked. "Into the clothes?" "Yes," she said excitedly. "Functional pieces, like time embedded into the garment. Maybe hidden clock faces in the lining or embroidered gear patterns in metallic thread. Time as memory. Time as legacy." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're your mother's daughter." Riley smiled. "And yours." They talked late into the night about the mechanics of vintage pieces, the history of embroidery, the symbolism of fashion. Riley had never imagined she'd be designing a collection inspired by dresses, let alone ones tied to such personal pain. But somehow, the healing had unlocked something, a bridge not just to her father, but to her own creativity. In the coming days, she began drafting a proposal. She called the project Heirloom, a fusion of generational memory and personal rebirth. Not just fashion, but a message. Wear what tells your story. Wear what makes peace with your past. where what was never meant to fit someone else's version of you. And quietly, Riley knew. The girl who once refused to open a birthday dress was now sewing a story, thread by thread, into something only she could have created. Not in spite of her father, but because of him. Chapter 8. The pitch that broke the silence. 3 weeks later, Riley stood at the front of a sleek, glass-walled meeting room inside the Vantage PR Group's creative headquarters. It was a Friday afternoon. The air buzzing with weekend anticipation and tension. On the table before her was a black portfolio, embossed with silver letters, heirloom. Inside were mock-ups, concept sheets, and an outline of the limited capsule project that had consumed her heart, mind, and sleepless nights. Around her sat the company's top creative executives, including her direct supervisor. Marcia Lynn, sharp-eyed, polished, and famously ruthless with experimental ideas. Riley took a breath. She looked the part today, her own creation, a structured blazer dress in charcoal gray. Subtle gear motifs embroidered in silver thread along the cuffs. Her look drew curious glances the moment she stepped into the room, but no one said a word. Until now. Marcia tapped a pen on the table. All right, Riley. Let's hear it. Riley clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, a split-screen image on one side, a photo of her father's workshop. Wooden tools, clock faces, dust, and gears. On the other, a high-contrast portrait of Riley in her new piece. Steel and silk. Tradition and rebellion. This is Heirloom, she began. A capsule collection rooted in the relationship between identity and legacy, especially for those of us who've had to fight to define ourselves outside of how we were raised, and inside the expectations we still carry. The next slide appeared, concept sketches. Dresses with hidden pockets lined in watch fabric. Coats with vintage watch crowns sewn into cuffs. A story told in seams and texture. Each piece in the collection incorporates actual watch parts, not just as decoration, but as narrative. Symbols of time. Of silence. Of memory. This is about reclaiming the stories we never felt allowed to tell, and wearing them. There was a pause. Then Marcia spoke. It's beautiful, but is it marketable? Riley had expected that. It's not for everyone, she admitted. But that's the point. There's a growing audience of consumers, especially women and LGBTQ+ communities, who are hungry for stories that reflect complexity, not perfection. Fashion that's rooted in truth, not just trends. This isn't just a product. It's personal. Another slide clicked on, a close-up of her dress sleeve, embroidered with her mother's initials next to a tiny silver gear. I spent years resenting dresses, Riley continued, voice steady, because I thought they were prisons. But I've come to see that what matters isn't the shape of the fabric. It's who gets to choose it and why. The room was silent. Even Marcia had stopped tapping. Then, from the corner, one of the newer design leads, Jonah, a quiet guy with a talent for textiles, raised a hand. Could we do a showcase? Not a launch. Just a private gallery event. Real stories beside each piece. Riley lit up. Yes, that's exactly what I was hoping. Marcia finally leaned forward. Let me be clear. This isn't safe. It's risky. It's niche. But it's bold. And you've made me believe it's real. She closed the portfolio gently. One showcase. One shot. Don't waste it. Riley smiled, relief flooding her chest. I won't. That night, Riley returned to her apartment exhausted but electric. She FaceTimed her dad, who answered while polishing the glass case of a vintage Omega. They said yes, she beamed. His smile was quiet but proud. I knew they would. I'm calling the showcase 12 Dresses. Each will represent a birthday I spent not understanding you. Or me. But now I think we both get it. He nodded slowly. I can't wait to see them. She glanced down at the silver gear in her palm, one of the first he had ever given her. You already have. Chapter 9. 12 Threads. 12 Truths. The studio Riley rented for the 12 Dresses showcase was tucked into a quiet corner of Seattle's Arts District, an old, sunlit brick building with wooden beams and floor-to-ceiling windows. It smelled of aged paint, warm wood, and possibility. Inside, the transformation had begun. Dress forms stood in a solemn row along one side of the gallery space, each one draped in a different design. But they weren't just clothes. They were memories made tangible, echoes of birthdays once spent in silence. Each piece would tell a story, and Riley was determined to do it right. She stood in front of the first dress. A soft yellow one, simple, sleeveless, with small daisy embroidery around the hem. Age 6. That was the year her father had come home early, smiling nervously, holding a gift-wrapped box. She had hidden in her room, refusing to come out. The daisies had withered in the backyard before she ever saw them. Now, the same daisies bloomed along the hem in metallic thread. Delicate, but resilient. On the wall beside it hung a framed note. Age 6. The year I thought love came with lace. I was wrong. Love came with silence, and silence needed time to bloom. She moved to the next, age 7. Then 8. Each dress told a chapter of her life. The loud arguments, the stubborn refusals, the quiet ache of birthdays marked by unopened boxes. Each design now infused those feelings with grace. Not to erase them, but to honor them. Her father visited the studio that afternoon. He entered quietly, holding a small wooden box, his hands reverent, eyes misty. Inside the box were tiny gears and metal pieces he'd selected for her. These, he said, belong to watches that stopped working, but the parts are still beautiful. Thought you might want to give them a second life. She swallowed the lump in her throat. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. They walked together down the row of dresses. At dress number 9, a bold, structured navy piece with gold accents, Edward paused. This one feels like a turning point, he said. It is, she replied. That's the year I realized I wasn't angry because I didn't like dresses. I was angry because I thought you loved the version of me that never existed. He looked at her, full of regret and tenderness. And I thought you were rejecting everything I had left to give. Riley turned toward him, but I wasn't. I just didn't know how to accept it, yet. They stood in silence for a long moment, then continued on. At the 11th dress, she had sewn into the inner lining a message in tiny script. I forgive you. Her father noticed it, but didn't speak. Instead, he reached out and gently ran his fingers along the embroidery, a line of tiny silver watch hands arranged like stars. By the time they reached the 12th dress, the one she wore on her 25th birthday, they both stood still. This was the culmination, a blend of all the elements. Strong lines, soft textures, bold shoulders, flowing skirt. A piece that no longer tried to be one thing or another, it simply was. Fully Riley. Will you come to the opening? She asked quietly. He looked at her, eyes full of a love that no longer needed translation. I wouldn't miss it. That night, as Riley stitched the last of the metal gears into the 12th dress, she played an old voicemail she had saved but never listened to, her father's message from her 17th birthday. Riley, I bought a dress again. I know you don't want it. I left it on your bed anyway, just in case, someday, you feel like opening it. I love you, even if I don't say it right. She pressed the fabric gently with her hands, whispering to the dress, to herself, to the years. I opened it, Dad. I finally opened it. Chapter 10. The showcase and the silence that spoke. The night of the showcase arrived with a kind of stillness Riley hadn't felt in years, the kind that came not from fear, but from clarity. Outside, the Seattle sky was draped in a velvet navy hue, scattered with clouds and the soft glow of downtown lights. Inside the gallery, 12 dresses had come to life. Guests trickled in, designers, artists, reporters, former classmates, co-workers. Some knew Riley. Most didn't. But all of them walked into a space that felt less like a fashion exhibit and more like a storybook written in thread. Each dress stood on a pedestal, softly illuminated. Beside each one was a framed card with handwritten reflections, Riley's memories, her father's notes, sometimes both. At dress number 5, someone paused and read aloud. She slammed the door so hard, I thought it might break. I never said the right thing. I only ever wanted her to feel safe. Yee. By the time people reached dress number 9, they weren't whispering critiques or snapping quick photos. They were listening. To the silence between a father and daughter. To the apology neither had known how to say. To the resilience woven into each hemline. Near the entrance, Riley stood in her final piece, dress number 12. It was bold, elegant, and unashamedly hers. The sleeves bore fine embroidery of watch gears. The lining hid her childhood sketches stitched in thread, capes, lightning bolts, stick figures with stars in their hands. Her father arrived quietly. He wore a suit. A real one. Not his usual apron or khaki jacket. In his hands was a velvet case. When he reached her, he smiled, wide, proud, a little nervous. I brought you something, he said. Inside the case was a watch, sleek, silver, modern. On the back was a new engraving. The time we lost made room for who you became. Riley blinked fast, holding back tears. Dad. He held up a hand. No speeches. Just one question. She tilted her head. May I take a photo of you? For the wall in the shop. She nodded. He raised a small vintage camera, one he used to take her pictures as a toddler, and captured the moment. His daughter, radiant, standing in front of the life she had sewn back together. After the showcase, people came up with questions, praise, even invitations for collaboration. Riley thanked them all, but her gaze kept drifting back to her father, who stood in the corner, quietly watching, as if seeing her for the first time and the 1,000th. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, she walked over to him. Next year, she said, maybe I'll design 13. He chuckled. Another dress? Not a dress, she smiled. A suit. For you. To match me. They laughed, warm and full. The kind of laugh that only comes after healing. And as they stepped outside into the night, the city no longer felt so cold. The silence between them was gone. In its place was something softer. Something stitched from time, understanding. And 12 dresses that had finally been worn not just on the body, but on the heart. Chapter 11. Letters from Strangers. 2 weeks after the 12 dresses showcase, Riley's inbox was overflowing. Not with orders. With letters. Emails from strangers, dozens, then hundreds, many from young women, some from non-binary youth. Others from fathers who had read about the exhibit in the Seattle Times and found themselves unexpectedly moved. One email stood out. Subject: My daughter won't talk to me, but your dresses helped me understand. I saw your show. I didn't get it at first. But then I saw dress number 3, the one you said you used to hate because it made you feel like a costume. My daughter's name is Morgan. She cut her hair 2 years ago and hasn't worn a dress since. I gave her one last Christmas anyway. She didn't open it. I was angry, but now I understand. I'm going to write her a letter today. Thank you. Riley sat in silence, her hand resting over her chest. She had made this collection for herself, for her father, for the silence that wrapped around their home like wallpaper. She hadn't expected it to ripple into the hearts of so many others. That afternoon, she met Jonah, the soft-spoken textile designer who had supported her pitch, for coffee. You need to do more, he said between sips. Workshops. Community exhibits. Let people write their own dress stories. Riley smiled slowly. Actually, I was thinking the same thing. Call it the Heirloom Project, he added. Not about fashion. About healing. Her eyes lit up. She thought about all the people like her, who had been misunderstood by their families, by society, by themselves, who were told femininity had only one shape, one voice, one shade of pink. I want to give them needles, she said. Not to sew fabric, to sew peace. That evening, back at her apartment, Riley stood in front of her old sketch wall. She took a marker and wrote in bold across the top, "The Heirloom Project, your story, your stitch." She then pulled out the very first dress, the yellow daisy one from age 6. She held it in her hands and whispered, "We started this together. Let's see how many stories we can hold now." Her phone buzzed again, another message, but this one was a voice note. From a girl in Texas. "I wore pants to church last week. My mom cried, but I didn't. I stood tall because I saw your story. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." Tears filled Riley's eyes. She saved the message under a new folder on her phone, Stitches of Hope. And in that moment, she knew. The dresses were never just about her. They were the beginning of a much bigger tapestry. Chapter 12. The First Stitch. The community center on South Jackson Street was a far cry from the glossy gallery space Riley had used for 12 dresses. The walls were painted in aging beige. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the chairs were mismatched, some metal folding, others plastic. But Riley loved it the moment she walked in. It wasn't polished. It was real. And real was what the Heirloom Project needed. "Are you sure anyone's going to come?" Jonah asked, setting out a tray of tea and store-bought cookies on the side table. He was skeptical, but supportive, the way Riley liked her collaborators best. "They will," she said, adjusting the fabric banner she'd made by hand, strung across the wall. "Your story. Your stitch." She didn't expect a full house, 5 people, maybe 6. But as 6 p.m. arrived, the room slowly began to fill. A teenager in an oversized hoodie and chipped black nail polish hovered near the back. A middle-aged woman with streaks of pink in her hair came in holding a handmade journal. Then a young father with his elementary school daughter, her hair shaved on one side, entered quietly and sat in the front. By 6:10, there were 12 people. Riley smiled. The number felt symbolic. She stood in the center of the room, not behind a podium. Not with a microphone, just her, in a loose-fitting blouse and slacks, sleeves rolled up, a thread bracelet on her wrist, made from one of her father's old watch straps. "Hi," she began. Her voice calm but steady. "My name's Riley Emerson. You might have seen 12 dresses. But tonight isn't about that." She looked around, meeting each face briefly. "Tonight is about you. Your version of the dress. Or the pants. Or the silence. Whatever you carried growing up that didn't fit, and how you've stitched yourself back together." There was quiet, but not discomfort. Just readiness. She pulled a roll of muslin fabric from the basket beside her, along with thread, scissors, chalk, needles, a humble set of tools. No fancy machines. No fashion show glamour. "This is called a base piece," she said, holding up a plain muslin panel. "Each of you will get one. You don't need to know how to sew. You can draw, cut, glue, write, stitch. This is your space to make your story visible, even if you've never said it out loud." She handed the first piece to the teenager in the hoodie. They looked startled. "I'm not an artist," they muttered. "Neither was I," Riley replied. "Until I realized I'd been stitching pain into silence for 20 years. This helped me speak." The teen took the fabric with both hands, staring at it like it was more fragile than they'd expected. Slowly, the room began to hum with activity. Pens scratching, scissors snipping, thread being pulled through cotton. The young girl asked her father to help her sew a line of hearts. The woman with the pink hair wrote lyrics around the edges of her square. Even Jonah stitched a small gear onto a corner of his, whispering, "I figured I'd make mine about my mother's watch." Then, halfway through the session, the teens stood up. "I want to share mine," they said suddenly. Everyone paused. They held up their panel. Uneven stitches, a broken heart with thread barely holding it together, and 3 words stitched beneath in bold, jagged red. Still. Here. Anyway. Riley swallowed a lump in her throat. What's your name? She asked gently. Jay. Well, Jay, she said, that's beautiful, honest, and powerful. The room clapped, not politely, genuinely. And for the rest of the evening, Riley didn't need to lead anymore. The space belonged to everyone now. One by one, people began to stand, to share, to cry, to laugh. Pieces of fabric became shields and bridges, proof that pain could be transformed, not erased, but honored. When everyone had left and the room had emptied, Riley stayed behind, collecting the panels carefully into a fabric box. They weren't perfect. They weren't fashion. But to her, they were masterpieces. Jonah came over, sipping the last of his cold tea. I think you've started something, he said. Riley nodded, exhausted and glowing. No, we started something. She pulled out Jay's panel and laid it on the top of the stack. Still here anyway, she whispered. And in the quiet of that old room, surrounded by threads and words and warmth, Riley knew this wasn't just healing. This was a movement. Chapter 13. The Spotlight and the Shadow. By the end of the month, the Heirloom Project had made its way onto the homepage of a popular independent magazine called Threaded Lives, which spotlighted social design and grassroots art movements. The article, titled From Silence to Stitch, How Riley Emerson is Healing Generations with Fabric, went viral within 48 hours. By Monday, Riley's inbox had changed again, not just letters from strangers now, but inquiries from journalists, invitations from podcasts, DMs from high school classmates who had once ignored her. Even outreach from large fashion schools asking her to speak. But one message stopped her cold. It came from the Franklin Foundation, one of the biggest fashion development organizations in the country, known for funding experimental capsule projects and launching unknown designers onto the global stage. Subject: Invitation to present the Franklin Heirloom Grant. We've been following your work since 12 Dresses. Your project reflects everything our foundation believes in: healing through heritage, fashion as voice, memory as movement. We would like to formally invite you to present a proposal for a national heirloom collection, professionally produced, distributed in select boutiques, and potentially adapted into a documentary series. You would be the face of the movement. We'll need a finalized presentation in 2 weeks. We recommend polishing your visual story and refining the garments for commercial appeal. Warm regards, Cynthia Lang, Creative Director, Franklin Foundation ****. Riley read the email twice, 3 times, then just sat there silent. It was everything she had once dreamed of. The stage, the platform, the resources to make Heirloom something far bigger than her living room, her little community workshops. But alongside the thrill rose something else: unease. That night, she brought the email to Jonah, meeting him at their favorite noodle shop near Capitol Hill. He skimmed the message and let out a low whistle. You're going to say yes, right? He asked, half joking. Riley hesitated. I don't know. He raised an eyebrow. Riley, this is the Franklin Foundation. This could change your life. I know, but what if it changes the project too much? Jonah leaned in. Okay, talk to me. She stared at the steam rising from her bowl. They want it commercial, polished, market ready. But these pieces, Jay's panel, the crooked stitches, the uneven seams, that mess is the point. That's the healing. I'm scared they'll want to clean it until it stops being real. Jonah nodded slowly. You're not wrong, but maybe there's a way to protect the soul and scale the impact. Riley didn't answer. But she went home that night and laid out every piece from the first workshop, Jay's included, across her floor. She turned off the lights, let the city glow filter through the window. and sat down in the middle of the makeshift tapestry. Then she picked up her sketch pad. And for the first time in a while, she didn't draw clothes. She drew people. Jay, her dad, herself at 6. Women she'd met. Fathers trying to reconnect. Teens too afraid to speak aloud. This was the brand. Not a logo. Not a collection. A movement of stitches. She grabbed a marker and wrote across the top of the page. Heirloom is not clean. It's not straight. It's not perfect. It's human. Then she opened a new draft email to the Franklin Foundation. She typed, "I'd love to present, but only if I can include the messy panels, the handwritten notes, the parts you can't sell, but you can feel." Heirloom was never about fashion. It was about forgiveness. She hit send and exhaled. Whether they said yes or no, Riley had decided Heirloom would remain rooted in truth, no matter how big the stage. Chapter 14. The unpolished pitch. The Franklin Foundation's headquarters towered above downtown Manhattan, all steel, glass, and clean lines, a temple of modern fashion. Inside, the walls bore photographs of past grant recipients turned legends, designers who had redefined style, shattered conventions, and become household names. Riley stepped into the lobby with Jonah beside her, both carrying garment bags and one very worn cardboard box, the same one from the first community workshop, filled with the imperfect. Beautiful panels stitched by strangers turned storytellers. A receptionist guided them to a waiting area bathed in soft light. Everything smelled like linen and quiet pressure. "Are you nervous?" Jonah asked, nudging her gently. "No," Riley said after a pause. "I'm certain. That's scarier." They were led into a presentation room. It wasn't huge, more intimate than she'd expected. Around a polished white table sat 5 people, including Cynthia Lang, the creative director, her eyes sharp but kind. A camera crew was setting up behind them, documenting the finalists' pitches for a short documentary series. "Ms. Emerson," Cynthia said, standing. "We're honored to have you here. Your 12 Dresses project moved many of us deeply." "Thank you," Riley replied, unfolding her portfolio, but it wasn't just sketches and polished designs. There were photos of Jay's panel, close-ups of the uneven stitching, pictures of people mid-laughter, mid-tears, holding fabric that held more than thread. "I won't sell you a collection today," Riley began. "I'm going to tell you a story." She pulled the cardboard box onto the table. The room blinked. A few raised brows. "These are the real pieces. Not curated. Not retouched. Just honest." She passed around several panels, some embroidered with words, others with broken watch parts, glitter glue, paint smears. Each one held weight. Heirloom started with 12 dresses I never wore. Each a birthday gift from my father, kept in silence, unopened, misunderstood. I thought they were symbols of rejection. I was wrong. They were his quiet way of loving me, even when he didn't understand me. She paused, unfolding the 12th dress from its garment bag. The room leaned forward as she held it up, strong shoulders, soft lines, and silver embroidery that shimmered with movement. "This dress isn't perfect. None of them are. But they speak. And people have started speaking back." Riley then played a short video. Workshop footage, shaky clips of people sewing, crying, laughing, stitched with Jay's voiceover from their first session. "I wore pants to church. My mom cried, but I didn't, because someone showed me I could be both soft and unbreakable." When the video ended, the room was quiet. Cynthia finally spoke. "You're not presenting a product, Riley. You're presenting a philosophy." "Yes," Riley replied. "I know you fund brands that can scale. But Heirloom doesn't scale in fabric. It scales in stories. I don't want 100 mannequins wearing curated outfits. I want 100 voices holding needles." A male board member cleared his throat. "Would you be willing to adapt the garments to meet retail standards? Refine the presentation. Riley didn't flinch. No. But I will partner with boutiques willing to hang story panels beside each piece, even if they don't sell a thing. Cynthia leaned back, thoughtful. Then she smiled. Good. Riley blinked. Good? You're the only finalist who walked in without a lookbook and still made me tear up. She looked at the others. I vote yes. One by one, the other members nodded. Welcome to the Franklin family. Cynthia said. Let's make the world where something that feels again. Outside the building, Riley stood under the gray Manhattan sky, the cardboard box still in her arms. Jonah came beside her. A grin spreading across his face. You did it. Riley smiled, not with relief, but with peace. No, she said. We did it. All of us. Every uneven thread. She looked up at the skyscraper, not in awe, but with intention. I didn't polish the pitch. I didn't clean the seams. And they still saw me. She turned to Jonah. Let's go home. We've got stories to stitch. Chapter 15. The Letter and the Invitation. Riley returned to Seattle 2 days later, tired but glowing. Her suitcase full of fabric samples and her mind brimming with plans. The moment she stepped into her apartment, she kicked off her shoes, threw her keys onto the table, and let out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since New York. The city had seen her. But now it was time to come back to where the story had started. Where it still lived. Where it still mattered. A small stack of mail waited at her door. Bills. Flyers. A card with no return address. The envelope was thick, the paper a soft linen cream. Her name was written in careful handwriting. She opened it slowly. Riley. I didn't know what it meant to be seen until I walked into your workshop. I was angry. Lost. I didn't want to share anything. But you didn't ask for polished versions of us. You just handed me a piece of fabric and said, be honest. That's the first time someone gave me permission to exist in the way I actually was. I gave the panel to my mom last week. She cried. We cried. We still have a long way to go, but we started talking again. I'm taking a textiles class at the community college next month. It's weird. Feels good weird. Thank you for giving me thread when I had no voice. Jay. Riley stared at the letter, her fingers trembling, tears gathering at the edges of her eyes. It had all been worth it. The doubts, the silence, the stubbornness. She folded the letter gently and placed it in the fabric box where she kept all the panels. Jay's was still at the top. Just then, her phone buzzed. A text. Dad, come by the shop tonight if you're free. There's something I want to show you. Riley smiled softly. The timing felt cosmic. When she arrived at Emerson Timepieces, the shop was quiet. The closed sign hung in the window, but the front door was unlocked. She stepped inside to find her father behind the counter, wearing his well-worn apron. The smell of oiled gears and old wood wrapping around her like a hug. He looked up, and for once, he didn't seem like the stoic, quietly grieving man she had grown up with. He looked lighter. Congratulations, he said simply. You saw. I watched the live stream. She chuckled. Wow. You figured out YouTube. He raised a brow. Barely. He gestured to the back room. I want to show you something. She followed him into the workshop. The space was familiar, dimly lit, crowded with antique clocks, wooden drawers, scattered sketches, but one thing was new. In the center of the room stood a tall, handmade cabinet. Its doors were open, and inside hung all 12 birthday dresses, now carefully preserved in glass garment sleeves. Below each one, a note had been mounted. Her father stepped aside, letting her read. Each note began with the age 6, 7, 8, and ended with a short sentence. I didn't understand you. I was afraid for you. I thought you'd grow out of it. I didn't realize I was the one who needed to change. Until the 12th. You wore it. And I saw you. Riley's throat tightened. I wanted to build something permanent, Edward said softly. Not to erase the years we lost, but to show they mattered. That we found our way. She turned to him. You did this for me? He shook his head. I did it for us. He reached under the workbench and pulled out a small wooden plaque. The heirloom room. Every stitch is a second chance. Riley let out a tearful laugh. You made your own exhibit. He smiled. You inspired it. Then, more seriously, I want to open this to the public. Right here. In the shop. Let people come in, see the dresses, read the notes. Maybe even leave one of their own. Riley stepped forward and hugged him tight. The kind of hug they had only recently learned to give. I'd love that, she whispered. As she pulled away, she looked around the workshop, the tools, the time-worn walls. For the first time, this didn't feel like the place where she had been misunderstood. It felt like a home, not the one she had run from. The one they had built together. Chapter 16. The Night of Threads. The sky over Seattle turned a dusky lavender, streaked with gold as the first stars began to appear, not overhead, but below. In the glass storefront of Emerson timepieces, now glowing softly with warm lamplight, the new sign hanging over the door read, The Heirloom Room. Every stitch is a second chance. Inside, the workshop had been transformed. The cabinets of tools remained, but now shared space with framed panels from the community workshops, notes written in dozens of different hands. And the 12 dresses Riley's story suspended in fabric and honesty, now given back to the world. It was the first open night. Riley stood in the middle of the space, wearing a navy blue jumpsuit stitched with a subtle thread of silver around the seams, not a dress, not a statement, just herself. Simple. Whole. Her father moved through the room with quiet pride, adjusting a display here, refilling tea there. But mostly, he watched people arrive, shy teens with nervous glances, mothers holding folded fabric, an older man with his adult son in tow. Strangers. Families. Survivors of silence. At exactly 6:15 p.m., a young person with bleached blonde hair and a jean jacket walked in, holding something close to their chest. It was Jay. Riley's eyes widened in surprise and joy. You came, she said, stepping forward. Jay grinned. You really thought I wouldn't? They opened the folded bundle, a new panel, bolder than the first. This one had a stitched silhouette of a child and an adult facing one another, their thread-formed hands finally touching. Below it. This time I stayed. Riley took it carefully, eyes welling. Can I hang it on the wall tonight? Jay nodded. That's why I brought it. Together, they mounted it between panels 11 and 12. It fit perfectly, like a missing note in a song. Later that evening, a small bell rang to gather attention. Riley stood before the crowd, no microphone needed, the room was already leaning in. When I was younger, she began. I thought silence was safer than being misunderstood. But silence is a story, too. It just needs the right fabric to speak through. She gestured to the wall behind her, a growing patchwork of pain, hope, healing. Tonight isn't about fashion. It's about family. Found, chosen, or blood. It's about turning what was heavy into something beautiful, not by forgetting, but by stitching it in place with intention. She looked at her father then. His eyes shone with tears. Heirlooms, she continued, aren't perfect things we pass down. They're the flawed, worn parts of ourselves we choose to carry forward. And maybe, if we're lucky, we stitch them into something new. There was silence. Then, applause not thunderous, but soft, persistent, sincere. The kind that wraps around you instead of crashing over you. Afterward, people began to leave folded letters in a wooden box marked, "To the one I never said it to." Others pinned small patches of fabric on the wall, each one different, some with names. Others with dates, or simple lines like, I forgive you, Mom. I'm still becoming. You tried. That counts. As the night drew to a close, Riley stepped outside for air. The cool breeze brushed her face, and for the first time, she realized something profound. This story didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever wanted to be seen. Her father joined her, handing her a cup of chamomile tea. "Did you see them?" he asked softly. "Yes," she smiled. And I think they saw themselves. They stood there for a long time, just listening to the hum of the city and the quiet miracle unfolding inside their little shop. Riley turned to him. "I used to wish you had bought me nothing for those birthdays." He looked at her, surprised. But now, she continued, "I'm glad you never stopped." He nodded, eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, pride. Together, they turned and re-entered the heirloom room, not just as father and daughter, but as co-keepers of a space where silence could speak, stitches could heal, and love could finally be worn with pride. Chapter 17. Crossroads of Growth. Months had passed since the quiet opening of the heirloom room, and word had spread like wildfire. Invitations came pouring in to art festivals, universities, even a major TED Talk invitation. Riley's phone buzzed constantly with messages from organizers, fans, and collaborators. One chilly autumn morning, she sat in her modest Seattle apartment, sipping coffee as the sunlight streamed through tall windows. The heirloom project had blossomed beyond her wildest dreams, but with growth came pressure. Her inbox contained an email from a major international fashion brand proposing a collaboration. They wanted to produce a full-scale heirloom line for global retail, sleek, market-ready, and with a powerful social message. The offer was lucrative, promising exposure and funding to support her community workshops worldwide. But just as quickly, another email arrived from a small nonprofit in Portland. They wanted Riley to host a series of intimate storytelling circles, much like her original workshops, to help survivors of family estrangement and identity struggles find voice and healing. Riley stared at the two invitations, her heart tugged in opposite directions. She called Jonah. "We're at a crossroads," she confessed. "Do I take the brand deal and scale the message with resources and reach, or do I keep heirloom small, personal real?" Jonah nodded thoughtfully. "It's a tough choice. One builds a platform. The other preserves the soul." Riley closed her eyes and thought back to Jay's words, "Still here anyway." To her father's gift of dresses, imperfect but full of love. To the room full of stitched stories, each one messy, raw, honest. She whispered, "Maybe the answer isn't either-or." The next day, she drafted a proposal combining both visions. A flagship heirloom collection for select boutiques with accompanying storytelling events, workshops, and digital spaces for community voices, preserving intimacy while embracing growth. Later, she sat with her father in the shop, showing him her plans. He smiled, eyes shining. "You're threading new paths. Just like the watches I fix sometimes. It's the broken gears that make the movement possible." Riley smiled back, feeling the weight of generations stitched into her own hands. Whatever came next, she was ready. Chapter 18. The Pitch and the Pushback. The sleek conference room of the international fashion brand gleamed with polished surfaces and high-tech screens, a stark contrast to the warm, handmade world Riley had built back in Seattle. Today, she would present her hybrid vision, a balance of scale and soul, to a panel of executives, designers, and marketing strategists. As she set up her laptop and arranged the mood boards, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves. Jonah gave her an encouraging nod from the side of the room. The presentation began smoothly. Riley spoke passionately about heirloom's roots, the 12 dresses, the community workshops, the power of storytelling woven into fabric. She unveiled her proposal for a limited boutique line paired with intimate events and digital platforms designed to preserve personal voices within a growing movement. For a moment, heads nodded. Smiles flickered. Then came the questions. One executive leaned forward. "This is beautiful, but niche. How will you ensure profitability at scale?" Another added, Your emphasis on imperfection is compelling artistically, but fashion consumers expect consistency and polish. Riley took a breath. Heirloom is about honoring imperfection because that's where truth lives. Our target audience is craving authenticity, not perfection. And with thoughtful curation, we can meet commercial standards without losing the heart. A third executive frowned. And the workshops? How do you propose to scale something so personal? I propose to partner with local organizations and train facilitators. It's not about turning workshops into a franchise. It's about creating a network of safe spaces that maintain integrity. The room was silent. Finally, the creative director, Cynthia Lang, spoke. This is a risk, but it's the kind of risk that could redefine the industry. We want you to lead this. Relief washed over Riley, followed by the weight of responsibility. As the meeting ended, she packed her things slowly, Jonah's supportive smile waiting. Outside, the crisp city air felt electric. Riley realized growth would demand compromise, resilience, and fierce protection of the heirloom spirit. But she was ready to fight for it. Chapter 19. Tensions in the Threads. Back in Seattle. News of Riley's partnership with the international fashion brand spread quickly through the tight-knit community that had grown around the Heirloom project. While many celebrated the milestone, others voiced concern. One afternoon, Riley gathered with several longtime workshop participants in the cozy back room of a local cafe, the same room where many of their first meetings had taken place. The air was heavy with uncertainty. Maya, a young artist who had been with the project from the beginning, spoke first. Riley, I love what you've built, but I'm worried. What happens if the heirloom we know gets swallowed up by corporate interests? The rawness, the honesty, will that survive? Another voice joined in, a father who had shared his story during a workshop. I'm afraid that turning this into a brand might silence some of us. The personal parts, the pain, and the healing could get lost in the marketing. Riley listened carefully, her heart aching. She understood their fears. Growth often meant change, and change risked losing something precious. She took a deep breath. I hear you. This project began as a small act of healing, and that will always be its foundation. I'm working to ensure that every partnership honors that. The workshops won't be commercialized. They'll stay community-run, intimate, and real. She continued. The brand side will be a way to amplify our message, to reach people who might never walk into a workshop otherwise. But the heart? That stays here with you all. Silence hung for a moment before Maya nodded slowly. We just want to make sure we don't lose ourselves. Riley reached out, squeezing Maya's hand. We won't. We're building something new, but it's built on the same threads that started it all. The group began to share ideas about how to protect the spirit of Heirloom, suggesting advisory councils and community voices in decision-making. As the meeting ended, Riley felt the tension ease, not gone, but transformed into cautious hope. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but together they would weave it carefully. Chapter 20. Weaving the Future. The crisp spring air carried a sense of anticipation as the Heirloom project hosted its first major gala event, a celebration of growth, roots, and resilience. The venue, a restored industrial loft in downtown Seattle, buzzed with energy, gathering community members, fashion insiders, supporters, and friends old and new. Riley stood near the entrance, dressed in a bespoke blazer dress embroidered with silver gears, a symbol of both her father's legacy and her own journey. Beside her, Edward adjusted his tie nervously, proud yet humbled by how far they had come. The evening unfolded with heartfelt speeches from workshop participants, touching stories shared through video tributes, and a live showcase of the latest Heirloom collection, pieces that blended raw authenticity with refined design. Between the applause and cheers, Riley felt the weight of every stitch she'd ever sewn, the dresses unopened and worn, the letters from strangers, the workshops that had healed and connected so many. When she stepped onto the stage to speak, she glanced at her father, who smiled encouragingly. This project began as a story of silence and misunderstanding, Riley began. Of dresses kept in boxes and words left unsaid. But it became so much more, a tapestry woven from the courage of every person who dared to be seen, to be heard. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. Growth is not about losing what makes us real. It's about carrying it forward, imperfect, honest, and strong. The room erupted into applause. Later, as the night wound down, Riley and Edward stood by the window overlooking the city lights. "Look at what you've built," he said softly. She smiled. "We built it together." And as the stars blinked above Seattle, father and daughter knew their story, stitched in time, love, and thread was only just beginning.